I'd like to welcome everyone to the City Council work session of Thursday, December 5th, and call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. First, we will have public comment. And if you would like to make public comment, I would ask that you raise your hand, come up to the podium, give your name and mailing address, and be kind and respectful and keep it under 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make public comment? Jan?
Yes, Gorman, PO Box 778, Cannon Beach, 97110. I just had a few questions and I may have more before the end of the evening, but I guess I'll do the ones I have now.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask about the adoption ready term in the packet. So I thought we were going to have public hearings and such at the council level before this would be adopted. So I'm hoping that's the case because I think people think that's what's happening. So that was one question. What does adoption ready mean at this point? And how can we protect our cottages and small houses that we have throughout Cannon Beach? I didn't see anything to my knowledge in this document about that. And I thought we were going to look into that before we, closed out this process. And then how, with the new regulations, will we implement these rules? How will they prove that we are going to get more affordable or workforce housing? What is the process to prove that these loosened regulations throughout the town will not just be for more second home? That's a beginning anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Anyone else in the audience? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to make public comment? If you would raise your hand. Okay. One last chance. One. Okay. So we will move to our first discussion item, which is the vacancy tax work plan. Are you ready? Come on up.
So ready.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this evening. I missed you. It's been a while, but we're returning with an item that we talked about last summer. In a couple of different settings. I think we talked about it at the housing charrette. We talked about it here at the joint council. And we may have even talked about it at the planning commission, but the idea of a vacancy tax has been brought up a number of times because as we are trying to close, address many of the issues that were just mentioned in public testimony, we're trying to make it easier to build more smaller housing. In fact, we're mandating that the housing that's built will be smaller. And we're also trying to manage the short-term rentals so that those new housing units will not be used for short-term rental. That will explicitly be written into the code that all of the new housing that takes advantage of these new rules will not be eligible for short-term rental. And that kind of leaves the last issue of second homes open. So the vacancy tax was a vehicle for us to address homes used for being built under these new rules, but being used for second homes. And that's why we talked about a vacancy tax. I think Alyssa made a presentation last summer that went into a lot of detail about what a vacancy tax was, what cities are using them, what their advantages are, what some of the liabilities are, legal issues. And we decided, you gave us direction to move forward with the idea of a vacancy tax. And it's not a zoning code amendment. It's going to be another policy amendment, but it's a very important part of the whole housing package. So tonight, Alyssa is here to talk about what a work plan would look like if you actually embarked upon the developing a vacancy tax for your city. So,
Okay, thank you. Is it possible to pull up the document in the packet that outlines it?
Of course it is.
Of course. Thank you. I just wanted to ask respectfully and kindly.
And you kept it under 3 minutes.
So far. But thanks for having me back. I think it was a beautiful summer day when I was here last, and now it's a beautiful winter, almost winter day. Yes, as Marcy mentioned, when we spoke last, the idea of a vacancy tax, call it a tax, call it a fee, call it an assessment if you don't want to call it a tax. The idea of a vacancy tax came up as one tool in the toolbox, as Marcy was talking about, in integrated strategies that can be used to address different affordable housing and housing development issues. So as Marcy mentioned, this one really focuses in on vacant homes, second homes, and those that are not occupied. And just on my way in here, I noticed that quite a few are unoccupied at this time of year. And so we went from sort of that background and research paper that we discussed in the summer to what would be the practical next steps for implementation? What would be the things we would need to look at in order to get to the policy decision? And I do think it is important to say it is a policy choice, right? You don't just implement a tax without understanding exactly what you're using it for, what you hope to accomplish, how you know if you'll accomplish it, and sort of the ability to make sure that you're doing it for purposes that will actually be successful. And so I think that's one of the key questions here is what are the policy choices you guys want to make around potentially implementing this tool as a way to address second homes, right? It's not like, as we've talked about, a second home, you might charge someone a tax, they say, I don't want a second home anymore. It doesn't automatically become affordable housing. It becomes another potential house that can be available year round rather than part-time. And so what do you do with the collection of the tax? And that I think is a key policy next step is, do we want to fund affordable housing? Do we want to build affordable housing? What do we want to do with the money we generate, other than make sure we can operate a program that is equitable? So this document that I have here is kind of a high-level overview. It could be turned into more of a project management document for people who want to actually implement it. So this is just kind of high-level work tasks and categories for your discussion and feedback. So I'll start with phase one, which is really sort of what I just outlined, which is get a handle on the scope of work here and the research that needs to be established as a baseline to go forward, right? So if you're really talking, I've worked in local government for decades now. You gotta have a project team, you gotta have your staff, you gotta figure out if you need a consultant. In this case, probably that might be something that would be needed. The next really question is, what's the policy framework? What are we aiming at? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the goals we want to do with this? So that every other step in the implementation process is informed by the goals that are trying to be achieved. So determining the policy objectives and determining how revenue will be used. Then there's kind of a data assessment, because a lot of this is going to be a data and measurement process over time. So we have to know what's the housing stock in Cannon Beach, how many are vacant, what are the demographics, all of the things. We've already started sort of a review of comparable implementation in other jurisdictions, but that would be, I think, a key thing is learning from how it's been successfully implemented in other places and choosing the best practices that might apply here. So that is, optimistically a nice 90-day timeline. As you can see, I just put a hypothetical timeline here, and this is all open for discussion. So phase two is really some technical work on both the legal and financial analysis side. Every vacancy tax that I researched has had legal challenges. Some have overcome them, some have not. Or some have retooled in order to address them. And so again, we would want to really understand the legal precedent, understand our own laws governing taxation, taxing authority, constitutional implications. That is as much law as I need to say. All of the rest of you are much more trained in legal stuff than me. Key thing that's been challenged in other cases is the definition and criteria of vacancy. So really trying to land on that as a legal term. Similarly, the criteria and definition of exemptions. Those are things that other jurisdictions have worked through, and I think that's a question to sort of bring to the table here. And then, of course, drafting an ordinance that sets out the way this would be done. So that's a legal body of work. Similarly, you would need some financial analysis. How many properties are even eligible for this? What kind of scenarios of a tax rate would be charged? Some cities start 1 year with a lower fee and graduate up over subsequent years. A lot of different scenarios that could be used to figure out what kind of revenue generated relative to the programmatic effort invested. So yeah, calculating the revenue potential for each of those scenarios and figuring out the pros and cons of each of those. And then, of course, understanding the costs to the city of actually administering the program. So what's the cost? What's the revenue? I think you guys have probably done this with the budget once or twice. Okay, I'm gonna go to phase 3, which is stakeholder engagement. And this is like a nice, simple, one bullet thing that represents a very bigger conversation, right? And I'm just here to point out that that's a key thing to do. You guys are the experts on how to do that in your own community. And you've already really started just by all the housing work you've done is engaging stakeholders in the community in these conversations. And I'm pretty sure that that this conversation will require stakeholder engagement. So I just put that as a nice 90-day timeline, just again, optimistically. And then I want to go to phase 4 because actually I think there's quite a bit of work in this phase, and it's actually kind of maybe the art of the program, which is actually create the system and mechanisms to collect the tax. And so this has technology implications, business process, administrative implications. So what is the system for property owners to report? What is the system to collect taxes? What are the protocols that the city wants to use to verify vacancy status? These are all, I think, really key questions in terms of what's a solid system that will work, right? Outline what happens if you need to do enforcement. Establish a process for dispute resolution. These are all things that have come from best practices in other cities. And then, of course, set some targets, accountability and performance goals. What are we going to decide we want to see as our success? And then I would imagine that an annual reporting process would also be one to put in place to evaluate year over year the impact of the tax. Again, 90 days, no problem. Phase 5, city council action. Again, you guys know this better than I do, but you guys would probably have a number of touch points around the policy options, responding to public input, and then sort of looking at the financial, legal, and administrative feasibility work, determining what is the appropriate next steps. And then, yeah, a year from now, you guys could implement the tax. You could communicate with the public about that. You could communicate with property owners about that. You could have a program established here in the city that begins collecting and implementing that tax. So that is the really simple outline here. But of course, underneath it, there's much more work. So happy to have any questions, comments, feedback, thoughts.
How many examples? I'm sorry. Did you want to go?
Oh, go, Gary.
Okay. Do you have any examples of other communities that have successfully implemented this and how it worked as far as actually converting homes to full-time occupancy and or raising money that can be invested into housing?
Yes, I think this is actually the key thing to understand around the vacancy tax. And in the document we discussed earlier in the summer, there are some examples of jurisdictions that have successfully implemented it. And if you look at some of their performance measurements over time, you will see that the success is not so much in converting second homes into full-time homes, but the success is in generating revenue that can be used to fund other affordable housing somewhere else in the jurisdiction.
I'm assuming that would be the same for us. Our homeowners are probably going to just pay the tax, but how much it will generate and how we're going to use it seems to be a big question.
Exactly.
What were some of the challenges that some of the jurisdictions faced and how did they overcome them?
Well, there's a whole body of work around legal challenges, people talking about constitutionality, people talking about takings. There's a whole body of work around that. I think the other kind of key challenge that will not surprise any of you is sort of the community feedback, right? Different points of view around property owners who have influence in the city or have the ability to file the legal challenges. And so many of the obstacles faced by cities along the way to implementation are around conversations with the public about their desire to move forward, right? It's raising a tax is not a popular thing in most local governments. And so I think that's probably the other key issue.
So do you foresee, you mentioned at the very beginning, assigned staff and consultants and a project team. do you foresee something like the task forces that we've used for the tree ordinance and the wetland ordinance and the housing?
I am not an expert on that, but what I would say is a lot of this is going to be technical work. I would see your legal counsel, your finance team, Steve, right, your city manager. Probably I would be willing to assist, right, in managing a consultant that makes sure that the questions that are laid out by the city are addressed and brought back to you guys. And if there was a task force that would want to sort of be advised at each step of the way, I think that would be a logical thing that would make sense in this case, if that's what you wanted to do. But I think a lot of it will start, the project team for me is really get a legal counsel, get a financial analyst, get someone to conduct the economic feasibility, do the data collection, and then report back to the policymakers.
Tim?
But we've had other jurisdictions adopt something like this. How does the public react to the statement that was essentially just made, which is, this doesn't really do anything for housing. It's just a revenue model. It's just a different tax that we're going to impose. I mean, I keep coming back to, for every hour we spend talking about stuff that won't impact housing, let's spend 5 minutes talking about stuff that will impact housing. And this is in the category of stuff that won't impact housing.
I think the key one is what Marcy has started with earlier, which is this is one lever among many levers to accomplish multiple things. And I believe in all of the conversations I've been part of here, these things have to fit together. One by itself isn't enough. But second, to your point of, right, what's it going to do for housing? I think that is actually what I've seen in the most successful places is when the government agency, when the city jurisdiction articulates a very clear policy goal and mission. Hey, we want to use this money to build X number of units in X number of years. Hey, we want to acquire this property and this property in order to make an investment in an affordable housing project. And so I actually think the key here is for you guys to really articulate clearly what you would hope to accomplish with it, because then it's very much a question of what are we getting for our dollars? You're going to raise our tax. Why? Because we're going to buy this site and we're going to build this project here. We're going to have this fund and invest in these kind of programs and projects. And so clear leadership and like affordable housing always needs a champion, and a tax certainly needs a champion. And so this is about articulating a strong vision of what you want to do.
Seems like there's a lot of champions for affordable housing around this dais. There's people who really care about this issue. I would be kind of first in line to say, we have 15 million of net cash after our debt. We have $7 million in the general reserve. We're not really in a position to say, we're resource constrained to solve problems. We can solve problems today. We've got resources today. And I'd really love to see us focus on resource or on solving problems before we declare ourselves to be resource constrained.
Elisa, it sounds like what we need to do before we even start a task force like this and to consider a vacancy tax is to do some real major homework in terms of what we have available here in terms of land, do a buildable lands. I know we've done some buildable lands surveys, and to decide how we want to proceed with affordable or middle housing, whether, how much we want to do of each or what we want to do with that. So we have all the building blocks, so to speak, in place before we start going for a vacancy tax to fund all of those projects.
You're never going to hear me argue against a good planning process. And I do actually think that that is the way to build a solid implementation, is on solid planning. And we are doing a buildable land study. But to your point, in terms of being able to come out and say, hey, what are we going to do with the money here? The city could say, hey, we've been talking about the RV site. Hey, we've been talking about this site. We've been talking about this, and really start wrapping your hands around sort of what do we think we can accomplish by raising this tax, to your point, like where do we actually move the needle in housing other than just accumulating resources? And so, yes, there is I think it's very important to say how many houses are vacant. What would it cost if we charged them all $5,000 a year? How much revenue would we generate? Would that even support the staff needed and the software needed to run the program? If we ramped it up year over year, what would we accomplish and how would we tell the community what they're getting? And so, yes, I do think there's a fundamental sort of baseline technical work. I also think there's a sort of an economic impact analysis. What does this do to the economy, right? The vacation industry here in this town. And so again, that's probably, we're going to need somebody with technical skills to conduct that analysis so that really the best policy decisions are usually based on good analysis, right? And I think that's what we're proposing here is build a solid analytical planning foundation that will set the stage for the kind of policy decision you guys are considering.
Alyssa, you're talking, I get so confused by the terminology because people use affordable housing to talk about everything, middle housing, workforce housing, whatever you want to call it. And the government does the Chet's thing, the government designated with the government subsidized.
Permanent, affordable, subsidized housing.
So is that what you're talking about? Or is that what generally this tax would be used for? Is that kind of housing?
I would propose a menu of options that you guys could consider around how you would use the revenue. You could buy land, RFP it out to a developer and use the money to write down land value. Those could be projects that are market rate, workforce, subsidized, whatever deal the city wants to make, right? So you could use it just for land acquisition and land value write down. And then that allows you to pick and choose which kind of development works on which site. Frankly, there's only a couple places where the permanently affordable low-income housing is going to work here, just for land reasons, market reasons, right? Those are the projects you'll hear about like next week with Seaside, where there's kind of a model. You put together a mix of incomes, you go get state funding. The state funding is mostly geared toward lower income housing, although there will be middle housing soon. So I don't think necessarily that we're talking about, let's build low income apartment buildings. It might be, hey, we're going to have a fund that subsidizes apartment people who do a duplex who want to do a affordable rental for 10 years. Maybe we'll subsidize their rent. There's a program that the city of Ketchum, Idaho runs called Lease to Locals, right? And they basically provide landlord incentives to local landlords to say, hey, lease to local folks instead of lease to short-term folks, and we'll give you a payment per year that will subsidize that for you. So that might be a program that would work as well here. So there's a lot of choices you guys have in terms of the menu of ways you could apply this money. And, that might be the kind of thing that some policy direction from a task force could provide to the technical staff around which different things do we want to solve for, or, if these are the three ideas, how much money would we need to implement them successfully and sort of solve both parts of the equation at the same time?
I feel like having a specific tax or fee specifically for housing, instead of like saying, oh, we already have money, why are we not figuring it out, would actually push the needle forward. And having what subsidized, I know of several houses that have never had anybody in them ever, that have been vacant since I've lived here. And we could have somebody approach those people and say, here's some money to rent that full time. So having the city have funds, I think is whatever, but having a specific tax specifically for housing, pushing that needle forward, actually making it happen.
We actually do have that and have for about 5 years and have been collecting money from every new construction project, and we've only used it once. So again, for our credibility's sake, we got to come up with housing ideas first before we come up with revenue ideas, I think, because we've got revenue.
Well, $500,000, $500,000, it's not going to go very far in this. That's a drop in the bucket.
Come up with an idea that uses some of it.
I got one for you next week when the folks had come.
Have some ideas that might be presented to us.
It's such an emotional topic here that it just, sounds so great. We're gonna tax the vacant homes, but to me, it just comes back to, is this really reasonable for a community our size with as many limitations as we have as far as buildable land? And so obviously phase one answers some of those questions. And I see that's where we're headed, but we kind of need to get beyond this emotional, it sounds so great to tax the vacant homes, but what does it really mean for a community our size? And I don't know if any of those examples you have are actually communities our size with very little developable land. But that would be what I would be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, I think when I was here this summer, I mentioned, right, this would be the smallest city in the world to implement it. And so I do think that is a key question just in terms of the viability of being able to generate enough revenue that actually creates both meaningful programmatic outcomes and doesn't create burden on the city's resources.
Exactly. There's the oversight and the enforcement and so, I mean, there's a lot involved.
The smallest city in the world.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think that is critical too, is a lot of the communities we're talking about have blighted areas or have other things that also generates economic development along with the housing. And there's certain TIF or tax incremented financing where the city says, all right, yes, we agree, this is a blighted area. We can create some economic development, we can create some housing. So a lot of these bigger cities have these areas that it's like, okay, that's where we want to go because that can have the most impact. I think those are some of the first things that we have to identify as if we're going to do something like this. And I think we have. I mean, the RV park is the one that gets discussed the most. If there's an opportunity, I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. That's the one we all talk about. And I think identifying sites and like you said, whether it's a task force or what we're going to use it for and things like that. But the site is huge and we don't have many, just crying out for redevelopment. So I think that's going to be real crucial because wherever we do it, we're going to have people concerned about what's taking place in the neighborhood. So we have to be careful and make sure whatever we do is well designed so that it fits in. And I think it's something to consider, but it's a big task.
I could propose that you could just say, Cannon Beach is going to start a lease to locals program. That's a program that's used by a bunch of resort cities in Idaho and Colorado. There's a whole national software platform. You don't even have to buy your own system. And basically say the money we collect is going to be used in a fund to subsidize landlords who are willing to rent their house for 1 year or more to full-time Cannon Beach residents. Don't have to make any other housing policy choices. Just say, we need this money to start this program. We're going to spend, we want to do 10 houses a year at $20,000 a house and we need $200,000 and that's what we're going to generate. You could really just start there. And Lease to Locals is a program that actually does have some ability to change who gets to live full-time in your city. And so even though it's not the whole solution, it is one that has actually proven results. So that could be one level one. Let's just start that program, see how it works, and then go from there.
Could you send us maybe a link of some cities that are doing it so we could read about them, how the success
Yes.
they implemented it?
Yeah, we had an opportunity to talk to the people from Ketchum. I can't remember what they were here, Robert and I, and this Lease to Locals was part of one of the discussion points. And to be honest with you, something like that, with a lot of the housing discussion that we do have where we're talking about trying to get it for locals is probably, I would say an not easier, but I think more attainable goal to strive for that I think is more impactful and realistic. But I can dig some stuff out, or if you have some stuff and we can pass that out.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that.
Definitely start City of Ketchum, Idaho is a great place to start.
Anita?
Well, I thought Lisa was asking about the vacancy tax, and I looked at South Lake Tahoe, and that's where I saw, they just voted on this, and it was a resounding no. lost by 73%. They pretty much copied Berkeley, San Francisco's vacancy tax word for word. And it seems like obviously it's for bigger cities. But it just got me thinking about how it would work in Cannon Beach, and how is it to motivate people to rent their homes? Because, the market rent in Cannon Beach for the homes probably couldn't be afforded by the majority of workers that you're hoping to find someplace to live. So, and it, when it got down to it, to me, it just seems like a property tax without a vote for the second homeowners. And I don't feel good about doing that to these people that, they came here and they're lucky enough to be able to have a second home. And if it's a family home, it's been, used for generations, to tax them, in Tahoe, they were starting at 3,000 a year, and then it jumps to 6,000 the next year. And, it's 182 days that you have to be vacant, and then just the auditing process, and are the neighbors telling on neighbors, and do they find this is my second cousin's, they're living there, so there are a lot of administrative and policy and enforcement issues, and that's where a lot of the expense goes, according to what little bit I read. So whether it fits Cannon Beach, and then if it could be earmarked, if it does get implemented, for just an amount of time that, we want to put infrastructure here. So we're going to get this tax, and once that's done, the tax sunsets type of thing, that might be a little bit better pill to swallow for people being taxed. So.
I feel like that I read the same thing about South Lake Tahoe. And one of the things was it was heavily like funded for having the tax struck down. At one of the articles I'd read about that, and talking about rent prices, I would say that the tax or the fee or whatever would be, so your rent's $3,000 is crazy for somebody that's making $12 an hour, but then you could be subsidized by this tax, so, or fee or whatnot. So I did feel like South Lake Tahoe was a great example, but I mean.
Well, it got on the ballot. There was a lot of
support
until they read the actual policy.
Yeah.
And that's when that got very divisive in the community. And I don't think any of us would disagree that we don't need any more divisiveness in Cannon Beach. So I guess whatever way we can fast track to see how this.
I don't think there's a ton of legacy homes left either. I feel like it's a lot of like new owners and a lot of new construction. And it's like protecting these legacy homes. I mean, I don't know. I feel like people feel threatened when I guess their privilege is being challenged. And I don't feel like there's a ton of legacy homes left, and now they have a huge asset. So if they're not using them, they should be using them. We have such a huge shortage problem here, and everybody's trying so hard to protect these, I don't know, the extra revenue, trying so hard to protect people that could help. I mean, that's just my thoughts. I mean, it just feels like I've gotten a lot of pushback already with talking about this. And I don't understand. People keep going, it's like, oh, this is why are we punishing people? And I was like, I don't feel like, I never heard of the tax being a punishment, but I don't feel like a tax is a punishment, but I don't know. What do I know?
You guys are all sort of honing on the same issue, and it's no surprise given what's going on in your city right now. The politics are super challenging, and the politics of this would be very challenging. I think South Lake Tahoe is probably the most current example of what to expect, right? We could also expect well-funded opposition, just like they had. And so I think that's a fundamental question here too, is in what way is there a meaningful conversation with those who are going to be affected, right? This might, if you do a lease to locals program, maybe you work with local employers and say, hey, we're going to focus on certain employers where we know we need to get workers, and you build support from employers, right? I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to do your politics, goodness knows. But I do think that that's a question that you guys have to approach thoughtfully. And that is the core issue here is technically we can give you all the answers you want. Politically, It needs leadership.
Is there examples of other communities where they've created additional carve outs for things like legacy homes, or where it's the same ownership through the whole thing, and so it's only new ownership, new construction, new stuff like that? Are there examples of that?
Yes,
Exemptions being in other codes?
yes, there are. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that in terms of how they sort of like the definition of what an exemption is. And so there's a whole category of things that might be exempt. You know, you're in the military, you travel for work, your house is under renovation. And so there is a category that says like you're descendants of the original owner and inherited it and haven't like never lived in it. There's sort of a language that people are using around that specific exemption. I don't know it exactly, but yes, there is a way to craft that, and we would need a smart attorney to help us do it right.
So that would be kind of addressing the issue with somebody it's their grandmother's house. It's been in the family for decades and they've been coming out, and as opposed to somebody that just wanted to purchase an investment property out here. Like,
Yeah, and I think
We talked
differences in
about
that.
Saying like, oh, it's certain years of ownership, like 5 or 10 years. I felt like we talked about that in housing.
that's something that needs legal analysis. But it's worth analyzing.
And that would be something that would be addressed in that phase one within the policy objectives, and I guess it would be the economic impact, the one.
2A, establish definition and criteria for exemptions.
Is there anyone on Zoom that has questions or comments?
I just have a quick, Steve, what was the figure we had again for the number of vacant homes in Cannon Beach, the percentage?
I think
Was it
we're, I
40?
think the number was about 1,900 total. I thought we were about 900 full-time. I thought about 200 short-term, and the remainder it was a little less than half.
So it's about 40% or something,
I would say 40 to 50.
40 to 50% are just vacant homes, second homes. Yeah.
You take 900 and you multiply it by 5,000, 3,000, and start getting in the ballpark.
That's a huge percentage. It really is.
Yeah. Right now, I'm working on that Oregon housing needs analysis, and one of the things we're doing is looking at peer cities, comparing cities of similar population and demographics to each other, and Cannon Beach has by far one of the highest vacant houses in the state of Oregon.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna comment, it was the July 31st Planning Commission packet for a joint housing meeting. The first page on it has those numbers. So it's 1,888 total residential structures or resident homes. 1,183 of them are non-primary residences. And then 705 are primary, and then 205 are licensed short-term rentals.
So 1,100
Are non-primary. And then, so then 18,
That's 40, 50%.
But
it's like 60%, yeah.
but we have to remember those aren't all vacant.
No, they're just non-primary residences.
Yeah.
And
That's the number from the packet, yeah.
we also have to remember that there's a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap, that there are many primary residences that are also STRs. There are many second homes that are also STRs. I doubt that there's probably 40 STRs that are only STRs.
It has, the way these numbers, I think they came from Robert, they were.
Yeah, and I think the numbers need a little bit of
Okay.
work.
I think I pushed back on Robert on that.
Yeah, no, I think the proportions, right? I think the numbers need some massaging, but, and then the thing is that's based on data and like Tim said, there may be overlap between the different categories. We just don't have enough information to be able to identify that.
Well, and the data source really matters, I think, right? In the state of Oregon, the way they do it is they look at census data where you have to identify your home as seasonal or vacation rental. But I know Robert and others have looked at utility data, licensing data, permitting data. And so you get a finer grain answer with better data. And I think that's the conversation we could have is what sources do we want to use to even establish that definition in the first place?
Isn't that actually 1C? Gather baseline data assessment.
Yes.
And since we have the address data of all the STRs, it literally would take an analyst about 2 hours to figure it out. To say, okay, here's an address. Does it cross-reference with a voter in this town? And then you'd know the Venn diagram of overlap between STRs and primary residences.
Yeah, you guys are asking all of the questions that phase 1 and phase 2 would answer. And then we could go to talking to stakeholders. That's not what we're doing right now, but.
Do either of you have a gut feeling whether something like this is right for this community?
I think you've brought it up, which is sort of the input-output equation. Do we get enough out for what we have to put in? Is the heavy lift worth what comes out of it? And I think that's really a question that only you guys can fundamentally evaluate, but we can provide some quantitative information that will help answer that to inform sort of the qualitative decision-making. I personally think you could start moderately, like I propose, with one program that focuses on something that can be measured and tracked, that can show a difference, that maybe doesn't have all of the political hurdles that some of the more ambitious ones do, and say, we are starting a program, and the way we're going to start this program is with this money, instead of, hey, we're going to raise money and then figure out what we're going to do with that. I don't think that's ever a winning strategy, honestly. And so if it was modest, I think we could target it at modest outcomes rather than sort of overreaching and then not being able to deliver.
But I also would say that phase 1 and 2 could be done. They could be done and then you could decide not to move forward. But until you went through phase 1 and 2, I don't think you have all the information that you need to make a decision.
I would really like us to concentrate on the lease to locals program. I think that would be a great first step.
Let's do that and figure out how to fund it.
Yeah.
I can go back and do research on that and bring it back to you on that. Like, how does a lease to locals program work? How do you set it up? What are the parameters? That Steve and I could easily do that.
The Tahoe one though, was that the tax because the lease to locals thing wasn't working?
I don't
Read some article somewhere. I can't remember. I read too many things.
And I don't remember if lease to locals is part of the South Lake Tahoe strategy.
Okay.
We've seen it in a few other, it's kind of a mountain town thing. It happens in Idaho.
Yeah.
Idaho a lot. And some East Coast places.
Yeah.
But it seems like that is actually delivering results. And so, lease to locals could look like, I'm gonna rent it out to 5 people who are, employees at a restaurant, right? It doesn't have to be like single family to single family. There's lots of locals that need leases. So there could be lots of configurations to get those houses into the marketplace.
What would be the incentive for local landlords to rent out the second homes?
The money.
Yeah,
We collect the money and then we say like X amount.
but if they're saying, okay, I'm gonna give up my house for the next year or 2 years to lease to a local, that's gonna have to be a lot of money, I would think.
Well, and sometimes you could negotiate a 9-month lease and say, hey, the months of June through September, I'm coming to my house. And so I can only make it available for this and this. And so instead of getting the full subsidy, I'll take the 75% subsidy. I think that, there's lots of configurations that I've seen where, it might be for, teachers who are working and then they're not in the summer. And so you're focusing on school districts and.
The lease to locals thing could be a great fit for the ADU work and the duplex work that we're doing. That's truly new housing stock that all we need to do is point it in the right direction.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the themes Marcy keeps bringing up is these tools need to fit together so that you can get more integrated outcomes than just one off at a time.
So is everyone, we have consensus on maybe going through phase one and so that we have information, but then also really.
Kind of in favor of first getting more information on lease to locals.
Okay,
And then
okay.
seeing if we want to go forward with phase one, because phase one is a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of technical work and it's gonna require an attorney and that's expensive. And so I'm just thinking that we might want to at least get this information first on lease to locals.
Everyone in agreement with that?
Yes.
Our Zoom audience? Thumbs up. There we go. Please listening. Everybody else okay with that? Yeah, okay. That's what we'll do.
Sounds good. I'll be back with another piece of paper. Thank you.
Great. Can you promote me to panelists so I can share my screen? So are you ready to talk about the code rewrite portion?
Yes, we are.
And we'll see this screen. No, how do I do that? I'd like to start at the top of the agenda of the whole packet, and we'll skip over these steps. So this is material. But to answer the question about what we're introducing tonight for the code rewrite, I'm bringing forward. So we're looking at page 1, and I'm bringing forward at this. Is this helpful at all? Can people see what we're talking about?
Only if you read it to us.
Okay. So the code rewrite items that I'm bringing to you include some housing. The package of housing I've been working on since May, since the charrette. And those are described in this first packet, part of the packet. But then I had included at the end of the packet some other items for discussion. And those include, we'll get to those at the end, but exempting housing from design review. And that's this item here. And then discussing with you, I would like your direction to move forward with this, some more robust architectural design elements. Be about strengthening the clear and objective design standards that apply to housing. So we are removing housing from design review, but giving you a more robust, clear and objective set of standards. Right now, you have a very short paragraph that is applied clear and objectively, but it's not, I don't think it's not really adequate for what you need. And we can talk about that more at the end. And then the last kind of general item was we want to simplify and modernize the listing of land uses in your land use table. And this is one of the top to bottom miscellaneous code amendments that we're trying to tick off as we go through the process. So I'm just going to move forward. I'm skipping over a list of material here. I want to cover this question that was raised here. What is adoption ready draft? And what is proposed in this package is When I say I'm using the term adoption ready, I'm saying that we would like to be able to take it to planning commission next. The adoption process would then begin. Planning commission, we may have an additional work session, although we've had one work session on this item already. Could have an additional one, but then we would be moving into adoption hearings at the planning commission. And then you would be going into adoption hearings at the city council. So it's the beginning of a long months-long process. But I would like this evening to get permission to go through that, just begin that process. That's what I mean when I'm saying adoption ready drafts. Any questions about that?
Jan, did that answer your question?
But to say adoption ready, that is, it's not necessarily everything you've given us here. It's with some changes.
Yes, this is the concept. I'm showing you the concept, which I think is, I'm hoping it's 95% there. And once we have the concept worked out, the next thing I will bring to you will be an actual track change version, saying this is what your code consists of now. This is where we're going to change the language, and this is what we're going to change the language to. There's actually an example of the track change language in the in this package related to accessory dwelling units. Does that answer your question? We're going to go through this package, and then we want to make sure that I have the concept correct. So I can move to the next stage of code writing.
I talked to you before the meeting, so you know what I think. So
I'm going to start at the top of table 1 and talk just about what's happening in the R1 and R2 zone lots. We have proposed there be an FAR reduction, and that's reducing the permitted FAR to 0.35 for 1 unit. Currently, the permitted FAR is 0.6 for a 5,000 square foot lot. And I believe I got this right this time. And then in terms of development standards, or what we're calling the shape and the size of the house, in this, we actually have 3 different flavors. So I have to go through these in 3 different paragraphs. In R1, we're permitting primary dwelling and accessory dwelling in any configuration to be stacked, attached, or detached.
Can we ask questions as we go?
Please.
So for the ADU, is that all within the 0.35 FAR?
Yes. No.
No,
It's
you're gonna give back.
maximum
There's a give back of the 600 feet. Is that what it was?
0.5. It may not exceed 0.5 FAR.
Oh, so there is a give back on the R1 ADU.
Yeah.
Up to the
Or do
0.5.
So when you say 1 unit, what do you mean by a unit?
1 dwelling, 0.35 for 1 dwelling.
1 dwelling. So if there's 1 dwelling plus an ADU, then it goes back to the 0.6?
no, 0.5.
0.5, okay.
duplex.
Mhm.
And so feel free to ask more questions as we go, because this is a little complicated where we came to in the end, but I think it's very thoughtfully put together by this group over the last 6 months. So I'm moving on. In R2, we retaining the permission for 2 dwellings in any configuration, stacked, attached, or detached. Now, in R2, an ADU is required to be allowed. That's a state rule. R2, in every residential zone, an ADU is required to be allowed. But in R2, there's a slight additional flavor because we already have 2 units, so we need to, and we're being required to allow an ADU. So the additional FAR give back in such circumstances, that would be for 3 units, if somebody took advantage of that. And this is language that was under discussion, I think it's correct, may not exceed 0.5 FAR.
Okay, that's where I am positive at the planning commission meeting. I was there and I got into it about this. And a couple other people who were in the housing group also said the same thing. What you've got here then is you're allowing 0.85, a possibility of 0.85 FAR on a lot. That means for a 5,000 square foot lot, that's 4,250 square feet FAR.
I don't understand the way you're reading the language.
Okay, you don't, because you're saying, the give back cannot exceed 0.5. Do you mean the give back or do you mean the entire? See, I'm not sure. You mean, which do you mean? Because when you say it this way, English language wise, it's saying that the give back will not exceed 0.5. So you already have 0.35 going on the lot. And then you do a give back and they add that on.
It's not my intention that it be added to. My intention was that it would be similar language to what we established for the FAR give back.
Okay,
This page.
Yeah, it does say,
And an increase up to a maximum of 0.5 FAR for a development consistent of 2 dwelling.
okay, so then it's got to say that because
That's
if this reads is a 0.85. It is, and you're going to end up with big legal problems too, because somebody's going to read it and
I
say.
don't understand where you're getting that.
It's gonna be in the code. I mean, I want to get the concept correct so that then I can change the code accordingly.
Okay, so-
Have another chance to review the.
So then you have to say, with the additional FAR give back, the dwellings on the lot may not exceed 0.5 or 0.6 or whatever it's going to be, FAR.
Total FAR.
What are you looking at, Lisa?
I'm looking at development standards in R2, allowing an ADU to be built in conjunction with the duplex. The additional FAR give back is such, in such circumstances, for 3 units may not exceed 0.5 FAR. The give back may not. It should be for the total,
Okay,
if that's what you mean.
And do you even have to use the word give back? Can't you just say
yeah, I think the word give back is the
that's the
problem.
problem?
Right.
To explain the concept, but, and I have done a poor job of it, so.
I wasn't reading it that
We
way.
gotta-
I was reading it as you get 3 units and they cannot exceed 0.5.
Yeah,
That's
that's,
not what I'm reading. I'm reading the give back is 0.5.
take away the give back and then.
There's a language.
Say total.
Thank you.
So that's all we have to do is say total there.
Yeah, just say total, not give back.
Because there was that confusion at the planning commission meeting and no one was sure what was meant. And it sounded like you were adding the give back onto the original FAR allowance.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's how this reads.
Make sure that in the next version, which will be the actual track change version, which we'll have a chance to look at. Planning commissioners will have a chance to look at. We'll make sure that it is very clear.
Okay, so you're saying that the total of the duplex plus the accessory dwelling cannot exceed 0.5 FAR altogether. And I'm wondering, I'm wondering, and maybe I can't believe I'm saying this, but maybe 0.6 would be more reasonable in a situation where you have a duplex plus an accessory dwelling.
Can we go through the whole package? Because I think that's something that became clear to planning commission. And you were there in the audience, was the ADU. There's some additional facts that come out with the ADU.
Okay,
Let's just go through that part.
okay.
At the planning commission, I presented a concept that said, that we eliminate the size limitation on an ADU. Do you remember this discussion? However, I also explained that by state rule, you cannot require parking with an ADU. Cannot require design review. This is part of this last paragraph in the ADU row here. And you cannot require owner occupancy requirements. So I believe that you may see ADUs come in without parking. And I believe you may see that it is possible to actually have 3 dwelling units on a site if you don't have to provide parking for all of them. So I don't think that you should raise this. I think you should keep it the way that it is. We decided to maintain the 600 square foot ADU size limit, partly for the reason that they're giving the parking give back anyway. If we're using the term give back, it's because they don't have to provide a parking spot.
So there's not flexibility in the R1. It's primary dwelling unit and 600-foot ADU.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, a duplex, R2 is the only place where you could build 2 dwelling units of the same size. But you could also build 2 dwelling units of the same size plus a 600-foot ADU that doesn't require parking on site. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities that come out of this. And yet I do think it achieves the intent of out of the housing charrette, more smaller units, some parking relief. So are there any questions about this section right now?
Harvey raised his hand.
I had a question on the state requirements. I understood those applied only to cities in excess of 10,000 population, and do not apply to small cities like ours.
The no design review on accessory dwelling units applies to all cities.
But the parking,
The eliminating parking requirements, design review and owner occupancy requirements are required by Senate Bill 1051 and they apply to all cities of any size.
regardless of size.
Yes,
So that's in place right now.
yes, it's been in place since 2009.
Yes, the design review board has not been taken into account. So anyway, that's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you.
Why we're amending the code.
Yes, that's why we're gonna fix this error while we are there.
Yeah.
Other questions about this section?
When it says owner occupancy requirements, what does that mean exactly? And then,
An owner occupancy requirement in your ADU right now, and we would remove that.
and the new dwellings would not be eligible for, well, even now we don't have them eligible for short-term rentals. So who couldn't actually occupy them? Would be long-term rental?
Yeah.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be
Wouldn't
required.
be required of an ADU.
What's that?
Owner occupancy would not, you could not require owner occupancy of an ADU.
Right, okay. But you can allow long-term rental and grandmother, mother-in-law apartment type people who don't rent, and people who long-term rent. Okay. Steve?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things we were trying to accomplish when we kept talking about how do we provide other housing opportunities. So that's where that came from.
Okay. And when it says new dwelling units are not eligible, you talk all along that third category. What is the definition between the definition of new dwelling units, new as of a certain date that will be determined?
Of these new rules once they're adopted.
Okay.
So that would be both primary residence and any duplex or ADU.
They're exempting those.
One of the things I'll be bringing to you at the stage where we have the actual track change language is a threshold at which a conversion is subject to no short-term rental licensing.
Thank you.
So the idea there is that you could remodel something that you're currently using as a short-term rental. And if the remodeling threshold was limited to a number of square feet or a certain amount of remodeling, it could remain a short-term rental. But if you were taking advantage of substantial amendments, building more units or building, changing the type of unit, then you would be not eligible for short-term rental licensing. That's the concept.
And if you had just a single unit on R1 or R2, that would not affect the ability to use that as an STO.
Did you get your question answered?
I thought so.
Just checking.
I mean, the new dwelling units are not eligible for short-term rental licensing. That's the primary, as well as the ADU or the duplex.
Let me run this scenario by you because I think it's not completely clear, but we will have to make it clear. Say you have, let's take you're in the R2 zone and you have one primary dwelling and one accessory dwelling unit. And you're using the accessory dwelling unit for an ADU. But you decide that you're going to take advantage of this and you're going to build an additional dwelling. And you're going to have 3 dwellings there. That additional dwelling would maybe take advantage of some of the development standards that we're allowing. It might be able to have a dormer. It would be, maybe you take advantage of the type 1 procedure for the reduction of a front rear setback by 5 feet to build that unit. Maybe you decide to go with the owner occupancy requirement, which we're going to talk about later, in order to not provide parking for that unit. If you did those things, that new 3rd dwelling that you built would not be eligible for short-term rental, but the others that you had on site, I think it would be fair that that would maintain a short-term rental status, could maintain. That to me seems like a fair system. What do people think?
But if you didn't take advantage of those new development standards? And
You just built a new unit, I still think it should not be available for short-term rental licensing.
Great.
But if we just cap STRs at 200 and then it's not a problem.
That's right. Or at 150.
That is a problem.
Maybe.
But I mean, a cap on short-term rentals is definitely something we need to do. What the number is, I'm not sure. Somewhere in between those two.
Okay, if we move on. Okay, so now just to cover ADUs, which we talked about quite a bit, I think I breezed through this part. The only thing I didn't mention is that as we amend the ADU section, we'll need to explicitly state that they must meet the requirements for height setback and FAR that apply to the base zone. That isn't, for some reason, in the ADU standard right now. So those items that are kind of shown in the white of the table, these are all, these apply to new dwellings and conversions in R1 and R2. And these new dwelling units are not eligible for short-term rental licensing. But then we get into the slightly different category of new dwellings, and I want to go through those one by one. These are a little bit of like things we want to give back in order to incentivize housing, but this housing must meet these owner occupancy requirements, which we're going to establish brand new. You don't have anything like this in your code right now. And we'll talk about the section that establishes the owner occupancy requirements after we get done with this section. But if a person decides to meet the owner occupancy requirements, they can actually get some of this parking relief. For example, they could reduce the parking requirements from 2 to 1 dwelling unit, 1 parking space per dwelling unit. Could also use on-street parking to meet their parking requirement. And we will write kind of detailed requirements about what is a street that would be suitable for that. This development application would have to be on a street that has adequate right of way, that has, it's not, needed for emergency response or other things. We'll have to decide what that threshold is for the street. So it's not just allowed anywhere, there will be qualifications.
People.
I think it's,
willing to go
I
for-
think it's ironic that we aren't allowing, that we have a parking problem here in town. And now we're reducing the parking requirements. I understand why we're doing it, but I just think it's very ironic that in one hand, we're complaining bitterly about lack of parking in this area, in this town. And on the other hand, we're reducing the parking requirements for dwellings. Just one of those balances that the new city council gets to work on.
Oh, and that's like Portland did that for all their apartment buildings.
Yeah, I know, and look at the complaints they've had.
Yeah, now,
And they have a lot better public transit than we have.
right, but it's really hard to get down a street at night if you want to park.
Yeah.
Because there's the two, both sides are lined, so one person has to pull over and let the other one go through and, I mean.
Back up.
Yeah, or back up. The streets are just packed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what happens. So
There's trade-offs with
yeah.
everything.
Mhm.
But the area that we're talking about is the R1, R2 residentials, which already have parking on one side of the street.
Mhm.
There are lower density, or they're family places, and when in comparison to like in our C1 zone downtown, where we have a definitive problem. So, I sort of understand this sort of wave on the parking requirement that I've looked at for like studio apartments where there may not be a person with a vehicle, they may have a bike. So, I agree, there's a challenge there, but in this zone, particular zone, especially R2 I think it might still be functional.
Well, I'm thinking of my street that is very narrow and has no right of way whatsoever.
Not everyone, though.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So,
So the parking relief, development standard flexibility, are both additional benefits for those that meet the owner occupancy requirements. And the benefit to the owner occupancy requirement is,
Housing that's not a second home. We can eliminate the short-term rental possibility explicitly, but we can't ensure that it is not used as a second home, except through the owner occupancy requirement. So it's a way of, without going down the vacancy tax path, it's a way of controlling to some extent the new housing that you're going to get.
but that would be somebody's choice,
Right.
that they're trying to solve one of these other issues.
Exactly. So it's something that the group has been calling a public benefits provision. You're gonna get a benefit by offering this relief.
It's the carrot rather than the stick for dealing with trying to get affordable housing in town. Someone would choose to build maybe a smaller home because that would make more sense to be able to have it owner occupied as opposed to building something larger that now has to have parking and because they can't get that relief in the parking.
Alyssa has said she often uses the term a stick painted like a carrot.
Yeah, we could move on. Are there more?
Steve, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that one is one we really gotta think closely about is, I got no problem whatsoever with reducing it down to one parking spot. You really gotta think hard about allowing for the spots to be included on the street.
yeah.
We could strike that.
And that's something that, and it can still be there, but I think as we're looking at it, I think everyone needs to think about that one real, hard, and it may get struck. If we had curb gutter and 66-foot right of ways and there was spaces and things like that and things like that, like a more urbanized city type situation, I think that is something to consider. I think with our rights of way without curb and that go all over and trees and different things in the rights of way, we got to think through this real carefully.
Well, I
Especially
think,
emergency service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things in the summertime are crazy. One side parking we have on certain streets, so just comment.
well, I think the part of the things that were in, I think you had it written here, maybe you just said it. Having the verbiage in there about where street parking exists and the right of way is adequate. I mean, we could strike it or we could add additional verbiage to define what equals adequate. Because there are, especially in the Tolovana area or some of the presidentials, not all of them, have wider right of ways that, like, I know the street I'm on has a pretty significantly wide right of way that has space for parking on one side all the way up and down it that doesn't interfere with two-way traffic. Versus there are dozens of them, especially here, Hills, Ross, all of those, that it is really tight. So that wouldn't be an adequate right of way to allow parking. So if we define that, what equals adequate, then some streets are just going to not be adequate.
Right.
So would on the streets that are not adequate, then would they have to provide an extra parking space for their dwelling unit?
They would have to provide their parking spaces on site.
On just one though, right?
Just one though.
Right, just one.
Even though, well, yeah, so I'm not even sure why the language is here then. If only one, even if it's not on an adequate ROW, why even have that language there?
Because someone might, if they do have enough street space, they might want to build 3 dwelling units and no parking on site. And they may be fine parking their car on the street. If the street, as it says, if street parking exists and the street right of way is adequate. In that conditions, we are trying to offer the choice, an incentive.
Guess I'm really confused. So they could build one if the right of way is not adequate, but if the right of way is adequate, however that's defined, they could build more than one dwelling unit.
No, they could have the parking that's required, they could use it on the street instead of on their property.
But not if the right of way isn't adequate.
No, not, but
Then what can they build?
if the right of way is if inadequate, they'd have to provide one parking space per dwelling.
Per dwelling unit on their on site.
Yes.
Okay.
But if it was adequate, maybe they'd rather put in a big garden. Than
Protect a bunch of trees in the backyard or
right,
move the house farther forward.
right.
I think that needs to be worked.
I have more questions about the owner occupancy requirements, but I don't know if I should save them because I know there's a section
Then we're
devoted to that.
there, almost to that. So next section is allow dormers to be exempt from FAR calculation. And and height limit, which the language was there, it's the mistake.
Out and height limit.
So what this means is you could have a habitable space under the roof and it wouldn't count towards your FAR.
Would not.
Would not count towards your FAR.
And then I think the current code, a stairwell counts as 2 floors. A one-story stair counts as 2 floors. Is that by the height? Are you meaning that it would only count as 1 floor?
This is not about the stairway, it's just about the space
But
under the
it's
dormer.
something that is 15 feet tall. Does that count as 2 levels? 3 feet. Oh, 100 square feet. Is that 200 square feet of FAR or is that 100 square feet? Because right now in the code, I believe it's 200.
You're talking about 2 separate floors of living space?
Yeah, so for instance, a stairwell coming up, let's say the stair component takes up 100 square feet. It extends to a second story. Brandon, jump in here. I believe that's 200 square feet of FAR used
Yeah.
up.
Right, all the living space.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was some code revision there, because that's been one where you're really not living under the stairs, right? You're, you know, the stairs kind
Is
of,
that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Tim, but is that your point? I'm sorry, I'm just
Yes,
not understanding where
the-
you're going with this.
oh. I was going with sort of some more equitable changes on what is counted in FAR. So for instance, I think there's I'm making this up, but I think it's, if there's a 48-inch crawl space, there's some circumstances that could be considered part of FAR.
I've seen all of these things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
In houses, attics converted into living space where currently they're not allowed, so they finished them all out, like a finished home, but didn't provide a doorway into it.
Okay.
Which of course was later added, or a crawl space that wasn't high enough to be called a floor. But then later on, they turned that into living space. Is that kind of what you're trying to?
I'm not trying to facilitate a cheat.
No, but it's not a cheat, but what you're trying to do is get some more usable
Clarity. No, I'm really just trying for clarity.
We're not discussing further defining. I mean, we can have a big discussion about FAR that can go on for hours. I think this is just about the
dorm
backs right now.
Well, she brought up the topic of dormers being exempt. That is
Right.
exactly.
That's a give back.
Is it a give back or is this just a change to FAR?
The idea is that you could have a room under a dormer. And in the building code defines, the height of a room and defines it as habitable. But what we're saying is that if it's in a dormer, it's not part of your FAR.
For all structures or for just these?
Houses, for residential structures in the R1 and 2 zone.
Oh, so it isn't a give back.
It isn't a give back.
What?
It's not a
It's not
give back?
This is a change in the definition of FAR. To some degree. I'm just answering the question that Lisa.
Have an extra.
I'm not arguing against it. I like the idea. It's just.
Does this apply to houses that are owner occupied, or does it apply to every house, including short-term rentals and?
No, this is only applies to those that meet the owner occupancy requirements.
Okay, yeah, so it is a bonus, a give back, yeah.
Apologize.
Benefit, public benefit.
I like that.
I think that's getting to where I want a clarification. The owner occupancy requirements are parking relief, the development standards flexibility, and do they continue on to the next page, the FAR give back and
Relief, and that's it so far. That's it. Do you want to talk about these other two that are part of the give back package?
oh yeah, I'll save it for the owner occupancy requirement.
So we're, an FAR give back applies to the owner occupancy. People who take advantage of that. But so does the waive tree removal in lieu for tree removal if after, they still have to go through the process that's been defined in the code, the tree code.
Marcy, but that thing again, you've got grant an increase up to a maximum of 0.5. That sounds like that applies, you're defining the increase. You don't mean that. You mean an increase, you mean
To a total of,
a total of 0.5. You got the same,
This is the language that we wordsmithed as a group last time.
no,
So
I promise you that wasn't it, because I would have gone ballistic. It's because it's not correct. Because when you say, you're modifying increase, you're describing the increase up to a maximum of 0.5. English language wise, you're just describing that increase. And so what you want to say is, and grant up to a maximum of 0.5 for a development consisting of 12. Just take out the word increase, or think of another way to say it. But the way you've got it there, it sounds like the increase itself is 0.5.
Nikki has her hand raised.
Oh. Becky.
Okay, for the FAR, I'm a little bit confused because at the top of this table, in the portion that does not require owner occupancy requirements, you were already discussing that 2 units as duplexes received a 0.5 FAR. That was not a give back, it was granted outright, regardless of whether or not it was going to be owner occupied or have occupants, long-term occupancy. So is there indeed any actual give back, or have we just defined FAR a certain way and it's not actually being used to facilitate long-term occupancy?
That's a good point. I mean, I think this was what we decided to give back in the event of owner occupancy.
So you'd have 0.85 FAR on a 5,000 square foot lot? No.
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 My
No.
understanding was that we were never granting more than the 0.5.
Right. That was my understanding too. It was going to be 0.5 maximum. And
Was the FAR give back with owner occupancy, or is it just?
Right.
yeah. And that's why that was why I suggested 0.6 if you're doing, which is what it is now. If you're going to have 2 separate dwelling units and an accessory dwelling, that is the give back. You get to use 0.6. But that,
But it's not even a give back at that point because Lisa, that still isn't tied to long-term occupancy. Now you
Yeah,
could go up to 0.6 if there was gonna be a long-term occupancy, and that at that point would be a give back because it would be more than what the base zoning is.
my understanding was that the 0.5 was for 2 units that did have the owner occupancy requirement. And I didn't realize that it didn't. Is
Yeah,
that
that's
what
not
you
how the
meant,
table
Marcy?
reads.
Is that what you meant, Marcy? Do you mean that the 0.5 is if you have units, 0.5, if you have owner occupancy or not?
I thought that's what we were.
Yeah,
2.
just a little bit of interpretation. Mickey, were you reading under development standards? Is that it? Where you're
Development
saying?
standards in the upper part of the table that is the base zoning.
I'm not arguing that we need to clarify the maximum at 0.5, but I thought the way I read that language was just an exception that was going to relate back to FAR give back in the bottom. So
Because this section only applies to, it does apply to all units. So if we're talking about 0.5 in this upper part of the table, that's not a give back.
The intention was it was only with the local occupancy.
Okay.
So you only get, let me just see if I got this right. You only get 0.35. But if you provide owner occupancy. You
Get 3.5 for 1 residence. But if you build 2 and they're owner occupied or long-term rental, then you get 0.5. That's how I read it.
So
Okay,
what
so
about a
then-
duplex that's not a long-term occupancy?
Then
Is
it
that
gets no
also
give back.
0.35 for both units?
No give back.
Yeah.
That's what
Back.
this chart says.
Because if it's not long-term rental, it would be what? Short-term rental?
Or a second home?
Vacation home.
Vacation home, yeah.
Because we've already established that they're prohibited from short term, so it'd be a
Right.
vacation home.
Be a vacation home, be empty part of the time. And I really think that I like the idea myself of having the 0.5 only be a public benefit if you're providing owner occupancy or long-term rental.
That's exactly what we've discussed all along. There's no question that that's what we
Housing,
are proposing.
that was our whole point. And I think that's what you're saying here, but I'm not, but maybe the way
Is that
that,
a common thing? A home occupancy requirement?
It's been done, Gary.
becoming more common with the issues that we're having with. Short-term
It
rentals.
seems to me it's a discouragement to building 2 units.
With what is a discouragement to building 2 units?
Requiring owner occupancy.
But you can still build 2 units, but they're limited to 0.35.
Right.
I don't see anything in here. It says long-term rental. I see meets owner occupancy requirements, but I don't see anything in here that says long-term rental.
It's part
No,
of.
I didn't find that either.
Can I make sure that I got this right? I'm confident that I'm reviewing this with the whole group, I hope. So let me run these scenarios by you. If you are in an R2 zone and you're taking advantage of this, the top of the table, you're not going to build, you're not going to take advantage of the owner. You're not going to provide owner occupancy. You don't want any of those public, you don't want to provide the public benefit. You don't want any of the reliefs. You just want to build your 2 units. You get 0.35 for one and 0.35 for the other.
Oh,
No.
no.
Oh,
It would be 0.35 total. So on a 5,000 square foot lot, it would give you 1750. And then if it's a duplex, you'd be splitting that in half, so 875 per unit.
I'm assuming means a deed restriction.
Yep.
So
You're talking about 0.7 FAR on the whole?
No, that's 0.35 total for the lot.
Right,
Gives you,
Yep.
of a 5,000 square foot lot, gives you 1750
right.
for your floor area that you're permitted to use. And then if it's a duplex, you're cutting that in half.
Right.
Eight-
Yeah,
that totally sounds like it's worse than our situation now. As far as building a duplex.
well, Gary, I think that the
makes it
entire
even worse.
reason, Gary, the entire reason we're in this conversation is that we are talking about how to incentivize housing for people who need to live here long-term. And hopefully that's long-term rentals in a unit that is small enough to have a reasonable rental rate. If
think
we
we're-
were to make it easy to build 2 units on every lot, we would likely be building many second units that become someone's vacation home. We're not interested in more units for the sake of more units. We're interested in more units for the sake of people who need to live here long-term.
And adding a second dwelling unit. So we are adding housing and trying to encourage added housing. And according to our numbers, if you add a housing, there's somewhere between 40 and 50%. I wasn't really clear on the percentages, but somewhere between 40 and 50% that's likely to become a full-time rental. So it seems like we're discouraging people from building that additional unit.
No, because if it was to become long-term housing, they would be taking advantage of the higher FAR.
Right. And nobody, so I can't imagine anybody doing that and taking a deed restriction on their property and having that reduce the potential for resale and the use of by the next owner. It sounds like we're going backwards.
Sounds to me like we're trying to make more affordable housing in the town. I mean, that's the whole point of this.
I think we'd probably get more rental units if we don't discourage it and put that deed restriction on somebody.
By your thinking, 50% will be second homes. And
Yeah.
50% will be rented. You think that's good to have 50% more second homes sitting empty? And
I think as good as additional dwelling units.
I don't want more density unless it's to provide housing for middle housing and workforce housing. I'm not interested in more density for the sake of more density.
So,
It has to be for that purpose, or I'm certainly not interested.
so someone building a public benefit of an additional dwelling unit, they can't be, we don't want it if they're not going to live here. Right?
Well, it's not a public benefit if it's not benefiting the public
Right.
by definition of the phrase, public benefit. So the public as being people that are living here. So if it's being rented or lived in by somebody that's living here, that's the public benefit. And that's what the give back is for the benefit to the public.
Okay, I don't see anybody. I don't see this as being something that's going to encourage people to.
I have a scenario that I'm worried is the loophole. Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you build a duplex, you may condominiumize it right away, sell half of it, So you could take advantage of the 0.5 FAR and then sell half of it. And that person could be a.
We have
I
an
think
ordinance
that's restricted.
that prohibits doing that. Or
Yeah.
we have a city ordinance that prohibits making a duplex condominium.
That's not the case.
I think.
No, that's not the case at all.
Only you can't prohibit that.
Well, then we have an ordinance that is against state law, if that's the case.
We have a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean.
We just
Bill Weisman
put on
has
forest land.
Wait a minute, you two are talking,
Yeah, Bill Weisman has indicated that we cannot prevent the condominium.
oh, okay, because I remember when that ordinance was passed.
So I guess you're saying, how do we stop that from happening, Marcy?
The point is to stop the 3,000 square foot houses on 5,000 square foot lot. And the trend would be that moving trend forward right now is more density, smaller footprint, which makes things affordable. So I'm going.
Yeah, I think this is solving the
Uh,
no big houses. I'm just not sure we're making progress towards encouraging additional dwelling units.
Well, Marcy, have other jurisdictions have done this kind of thing, correct?
They've ratcheted down the FAR and then they give back FAR if you build additional units.
Yeah, so that we're not inventing the wheel here. This is something that has been tried and seems to be successful towards increasing.
So your options are, you could build 2 825 square foot units on that standard lot. Or you could take,
On the R2.
you could put a deed restriction on it if you're going to live here. I don't know, those don't seem like,
And then you get 1,250 square feet per unit.
right, but
Yeah.
who's gonna take a deed restriction on their property and affect the resale value of it?
Maybe they won't and they'll build an 875 square foot unit. Which by virtue of being smaller is just less expensive than the 1,250 square foot unit.
If they're building as an investment, of course, they're not going to want to do it, you know, because they're building just as an investment. But if they're building because they want to be part of the community and want to give public benefit to the community, then it'll work.
I don't know, I think we all think about investment. You built an extra 350 square feet
350 square feet?
to your house.
I what? What are you talking about? I built 350 square.
We had this conversation and
I didn't put an addition on my house.
when you built it,
Yeah,
I think you told me that
the 2,000 square,
You-
or
you-
21's,
if you would have built under the current rules, you would be
built small.
350
That's right.
over, but you decided to build it because it's got some usefulness
Yeah, that's true.
and
But
it
if
makes
it-
sense.
If it was
For
smaller,
anybody building, it makes sense to think about,
but at
if
the,
any of us are buying a house, or building a house, it's an investment.
at the time we built it, this problem wasn't even in my radar. The fact that there was a lack of workforce and middle housing. If I was building it now, I would. I'd take a different attitude towards it. I would. You don't look like you believe me, and you don't have to, because I don't
It's
just
not
about
really
money,
about-
Gary.
It's about someone who's building a home. And, you know, if they can have that extra bedroom, it's going to add how much to their total
What
investment?
exactly are you worried about? I'm
Yeah.
confused what you're worried about. Like, you're worried about somebody that's in their investment and their resale value? I mean,
Yeah, I'm concerned that people aren't gonna do this.
you're concerned that these people aren't gonna flat do it. Like,
Right.
okay.
So they can go.
They're not gonna build 2 tiny units. And
I don't know.
they're not gonna take a deed restriction.
I say that's 200 square feet larger than my house.
That's about.
First off, I think we need to remember that it has worked in other jurisdictions.
Right.
And so we have to take that as,
Okay, I mean, if this is,
if it's worked in other in other municipalities, why wouldn't it work here?
Where is my thinking off? I guess I'm,
Taking an even dimmer view of human nature than I am.
Come on now.
I didn't think was possible.
now that's insulting.
No. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Gary's point. A lot of people, that's the issue right now is people have a certain floor area ratio. They are gonna build to the maximum they can. So you are correct. I think the point that people are taking here is if we are gonna make this change, we are saying that no longer is gonna be the issue. You're not gonna have 0.6 anymore. You're gonna have 0.35. And as a community, that's what I guess we're making the decision to do. So I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm saying that's what I'm hearing.
And I think it's going to add probably more dwelling units if we incentivize it by allowing the non-deed restricted and building that second unit. And again, if you look at the numbers, 40 to 50% of them are likely to become full-time rentals, but
That's not true, Gary. That's not true.
Saying that.
getting it by what our numbers are.
No, but it doesn't correlate at all. I mean, you're drawing a false, comparison.
Can we hear from the other three?
There are multiple.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always forget. Okay. Harvey. Harvey, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Yes, I don't want to interrupt this conversation.
Please.
To go back to the population of cities and SB 1051, I just took a look at that bill, and it definitely does have population size limitations, and the limitations on ADUs are pretty clearly stated as 2,500. So I think we need to make sure we're really on the right basis here. If we're against state law, we don't want to do that. But we want to make sure we really understand whether we need to apply state law here.
Answer that question. Governor Kotek made this, and if you read additional interpretation that's available on DLC's website, you'll see that Governor Kotek made SB 1051 apply to all cities.
I think we need that clearly proven, because it certainly doesn't look like it when I looked at 1051.
Okay, we will make sure that we're clear on that one.
You make sure, yeah.
Yeah,
We don't want to be off base.
That's right, we don't. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Clay, it's your turn.
You're muted.
Play. You
Unmute.
you're mute. There you go.
We.
Oh, he's still muted.
I keep hitting Mickey's picture.
Okay, now we
But
can-
Mickey
hear
Mickey had
you.
her hand up before me. So Mickey, you had a question. Go.
No, you go ahead. You
All right.
haven't gotten to talk yet.
I may be way too lofty on this, but one of the things I was thinking about, I've heard a few things that just caught my attention. Nancy, you'd said something, I don't know if I'm on track with this or not, earlier about the economics of renting. And I promise I'll come back to what we're talking about now. The economics of renting. Why, if someone's not renting their house now, why are they going to rent it later, even if it's subsidized? And the first thing that came to me was, well, maybe if the market rate for renting units long-term looked closer to, or maybe somewhere between what someone could get on more of a short-term basis, they would be more incentivized to rent long-term. And if they're more incentivized to rent long-term because the rates are higher, they'll be more incentivized to build duplexes. I frankly think, I'm not going to step into the argument or the discussion we were just having around what's going to be built and why, but it seems to me the economics around building a duplex right now, purely from what you would get if you were renting a duplex at market rate in Cannon Beach, would not justify building a duplex. However, if you were able to rent a duplex long-term at a rate that was higher than market, or what's currently market in Cannon Beach, maybe you would. And it seems like there may be a possibility of doing what Marcy and Alyssa were saying we need to think about in this larger picture, and that is, how do some of the things we're talking about marry together? So if we did have, and I did, by the way, I did some math on 900 houses, and I think Tim's got a good point. There's probably quite a few carve outs. But take even half of that, it's several $1 million if you had $3,000 on 500 houses. Say that we were renting these, the houses were being rented for a higher than market. I hate to frame it like that. A market rate that was higher than what is currently that is currently in place in Cannon Beach, you would have more reasons for people to build. And I think there may be an opportunity for us to look at tying the conversation we're currently having around what's going to motivate people to build duplexes and this other section around lease to locals. So that was just the thought I had as we were having the discussion just now, and Nancy, something you said earlier. So thank you. I'm done.
Okay, Mickey?
First, I second Clay's point that we need to tie this conversation with at least local conversation and potential subsidies. I think my original point, the reason I raised my hand, was that we need to remember, as Alyssa said, Cannon Beach has more second homes than anywhere in Oregon. So there is an incredible pool of buyers. And if there are small units available, that pool will actually get larger, because suddenly a vacation home will be accessible to people to whom it is not currently accessible here in Cannon Beach, because of the fact that most of the homes for sale are relatively large. So we have to be very careful with the assumption that adding units equals more available for local people to buy, because we have such a huge pool of well-funded individuals who are looking for any opportunity to buy a second home, which is why I think it's incredibly important that we keep focused on the owner occupancy choices. And to the extent that we're worried about investment decisions, I don't believe that a deed restriction is necessarily going to drive people away. For some people, it will be part of the investment. It will be guaranteed income to help pay for the project. They won't mind having a deed restriction because they're planning on that long-term income from the rental. And as they sell it, for the person buying it, it may be paying part of a mortgage. So to me, I don't think we have to be scared of the fact that there's a deed restriction. That's it.
Thank you.
We'll let Marcy move on.
Thank you. Go ahead, Marcy. I'm not sure where we're at.
I don't think Marcy does either.
What was that comment?
Do you know where we're at?
Yeah.
I know we're at, it's Cannon Beach.
Little sidetrack.
I had these two parts up here, but I'll remove this. Wait.
Oh, that's true.
We were here at, I believe we're at tree code relief.
Yes, I would agree.
So the concept here is to kind of working with the tree code that for, as a public benefit for someone that's providing a unit that provides occupancy, we would waive the cost of the city arborist. This would be after they've, gone through this step evaluation process, tree removal is found to be necessary. And this was a proposal. It passed kind of the gauntlet at the last planning commission, so it's here. How do people feel about this?
Anybody have any thoughts?
I like it because you're still having the completion of the multi-step evaluation process. In other words, if they can move the house 2 feet to avoid cutting down the tree, they do that. If they can, all the different things or get a increased side yard setback or front yard setback to avoid cutting down the tree, they do that. They go through that whole process, and then if they can't do any of those things and they cut down the tree, they get forgiveness on the fee. I think that, I don't like that, but I think it's fair.
It keeps us from getting in the way of actual housing that's gonna get used.
Yeah.
The tree code getting in the way of actual housing that'll get used.
Right.
Anyone else have thoughts? We're gonna actually agree on something? Okay, keep going.
So I'm jumping down to table 3 so we can discuss the owner occupancy requirements.
Okay.
So it's in this one table that you will find on page 3 of your attachment. This is a new section. It would have to be a new title within your code of ordinances. But it is also modeled on things that other cities are doing. And we talked about this quite a bit. It requires that the city staff has, a new role in managing deeds and enforcing this, but people were interested in moving forward with it. So that's why it's here. The concept is that in order to be considered for parking relief, or the development standards flexibility, or the FAR give back, or the tree code relief, as defined in your future section, the applicant must verify by oath or affirmation in the application that the proposed construction will meet the following owner occupancy requirements and public benefits upon completion of construction. Documentation must be recorded with the deed before the occupancy permit is granted. So there are 3 sections here. Once sold to the initial buyer, the dwelling unit shall remain owner occupied as the principal residence of the title holder receiving the tax exemption during the tax exemption period. And I left this tax exemption in here because it's often used as a tax exemption measure, but we're not using it for that here. But this is a similar language. Steve is going to work with me on the actual language here. Hardship exception to the owner, this is number 2. Hardship exception can be granted in accordance with the following circumstances. You have active military duty that takes you outside of the area. You're temporarily relocated to care for an ill or dying family member, or you're temporarily relocated by an employer. So those are thresholds that can be added to as well. And then during the exemption period, the dwellings may only be rented for periods exceeding 6 months. Mike, did I get that right this time?
I think so. Yeah, it looks good.
I guess I don't quite understand the exemption period. The dwellings may only be rented for periods exceeding 6 months. What happens if you are temporarily relocated to care for an ill or dying member and you come back in 4 months? As I read this, it means that you are able to rent your house out to somebody for longer than 6 months, or required to rent something out to somebody for longer than 6 months. But you come back and it's 2 months less than the time that you rented it out for. To me, it doesn't,
Hardship exception means that they don't have to do anything. They don't have to live there and they don't have to rent it out. That's their
but this says it may only be rented for periods exceeding 6 months.
So if you're only gone for 4 months, you can't rent it out.
But you don't know that you're going to be gone for 4 months.
Well, in situations like that, you're having somebody sign a lease and then you're evicting them on 0 days. notice.
It's just
The issues where we scratch our heads and try to figure out how we deal with it.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
It is, unless you're going to be gone, unless you know you're going to be gone for more than 6 months, you can't rent it out.
But then it needs to say that.
You shouldn't rent.
You shouldn't rent it out.
Well, it needs to say that then.
That's how I
see
read
what You're
it.
saying, Nancy, but I see it as may, meaning you might do it or you might not.
Yeah.
And may means
I think there needs to be an additional sentence there or something that
all right.
that explains it a little bit more, because it's very confusing to me.
Put in an additional sentence.
It says what?
It says,
It may be rented for shorter periods during periods of hardship. I mean, it's simple. We can.
and then who's going to monitor that too? I guess the other question is, who's going, who gets to do it?
Hey, I get to do this.
Do you get to monitor this entire table? I mean, in terms of whether or not they actually follow the long-term rental or owner occupied? And do you get to monitor whether they're in active military duty or going to see a sick relative?
Well, those were some of my questions. The one thing that I was wondering about, and we might have to clarify maybe a little bit more, is somehow, somewhere, we're gonna have to put some responsibility on the owners to make sure that they're providing the, department some type of documentation that is justifying, hey, I'm gonna be gone for 6 months, because I don't know, I'm not gonna know otherwise.
Yeah, I mean,
If a person doesn't do it unless, and then we get into the enforcement and all the fun.
Yeah.
Someone saying this and that, so, it would maybe be helpful to ask for some responsibility of the owner to provide the community development department with documentation that one of these issues is happening, so we can monitor it, because otherwise we won't know. And even then, they may not do it, but at least we have something then to go off of.
Isn't it saying they're gonna attest to this? So it would be a declaration.
Only, I think.
Only when they-
Well, I don't know, unless the deed restriction includes that. The deed restriction is really just that you're getting the public benefit.
that's really needs to be looked at. I think all of that whole table needs to be thoroughly examined.
This is, what is here?
Because that part's granted at occupancy, or I get that then, once that happens. I don't know if I ever see you again.
I think the intention, Nancy, is to lay out in some broad terms, the concepts that we'd like you to approve, knowing that when we bring this back, it's going to be a lot more detailed. And you raised a very good point, and we can change that language to recognize somebody who might want to rent during a period that they have a hardship. And for that period, right? So it's one of those details I think we'll definitely address.
And maybe, and I know from an administration standpoint, maybe it is something that it's documentation that they're talking to the community development part of it to provide what that issue is, and that we have an opportunity to work with them with regards to situations.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you can be monitoring short-term rentals and
Right.
the other kinds of things that you're dealing with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has this been looked at by attorneys?
Not yet.
Okay.
Get through.
It needs to be.
But I
I mean, I think they're gonna.
that's the part that we start to do that when we get into the adoption language.
Okay.
I do want to say that this provision was necessary to get all of the others.
Right.
in. There were people who aren't on the housing group who are passionate that the other amendments for development standards and FAR there wouldn't be a good thing for Cannon Beach without this provision. All right, so I'm going to move now back up to let's just talk about the downtown.
Table 2, correct, Marcy?
Table 2, page 2. Crosses over to the 2 pages. There's we're talking here about C1 zoned lots with street facing property line on North Spruce between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. So this only applies to that area. And the development standards we would amend in concept are allow options for meeting current landscaping requirements, such as vertical landscaping. And that comes from the studies that were done to show how much the landscaping requirement, especially in parking lots, limits the amount of development of housing. Another would be to allow a 3rd story within a dormer. So this is within a dormer that protrudes out of a sloping roof. But only then allow a 3rd story. And another is and it is helpful to see the actual language of your code, so it's footnoted below. But amend your 50% limitation on residential uses. Right, instead require retail only on the ground floor of the street fronting buildings or portions of buildings. And permit residential only uses on the rear of the lots or the rear of buildings. So there's a lot of wordsmithing to be done to the actual code language, but that's the concept. And eliminate or simplify your density limitations. And those they're extensive, they're fashioned, they require way more for lot size for a multi-dwelling than you would allow today. So this is kind of a section that you should modernize. And if I could move to the next, again, we have these three categories of getting R1 and 2 downtown. We have those that are by right. And again, that you get a little extra if you meet the owner occupancy requirements. And in that case, if you meet the owner occupancy requirements, you could eliminate or have your parking requirements waived. And in all cases, these new dwelling units are not eligible for short-term rental license.
Or second homes.
Correct, because it has the owner occupancy.
Right, as long as we have like, but that would only apply to this darker table portion. Yes, and you also would not get your parking waived. Okay, so did we hit the target on this one after the last several months of defining what the downtown zoning allowance would be for housing? Getting close?
So I would think that this applies only to the west side of Spruce Street. Is that right?
And I believe interpreting for the group that this is intended to be kind of a test on a limited area.
Okay.
With the idea that if it works, then it could be expanded.
Anita, did you want to say something?
Well, I guess when you're talking about the downtown area, I feel like that needs to be protected and consistent in its look. And so there's only a few places that I think, I mean, we're not encouraging people to tear down and rebuild, just so they can have some dwellings, residential dwellings on the second or third floor. And so I feel like the downtown area needs to be consistent in what has historically been there. Rather than having buildings that are 3 stories high with a dormer. Cannon Beach has been known for its beautiful landscaping, flowers. So, you know, I garden and I'm not quite clear. I know what a vertical gardening is, but I'm not quite clear. What does that mean we're going to grow? Ivy, honeysuckle. I mean, so I want to be careful that that requirement is not just dismissed, because people come to Cannon Beach because of the gardens and the flowers, even though the elk make it challenging. And I guess I just want to kind of throw that in the mix of development and how it relates to the downtown area.
I think that there's not a third story though. There's not 3 stories. It's the, you know, it's like Whitebird, how there's that little, well, it's like that.
Okay.
It's still the 2 stories.
Yeah.
But the dormer has,
Words though, 3 stories
Yeah.
with a dormer, then I'm thinking,
No.
okay, so now we're
that is
3 stories and it's
Says in a dorm.
with dormer. Okay.
right. Yeah, it's the same.
Says if
Well,
you have a roof. have a dormer.
Whitebird
Right.
story.
just so it's not so different looking, so that, you know,
Yes.
one is much higher and.
Well, there's a.
Let's talk one at a time. Everyone,
Sorry.
one at a time, please. Okay, so Marcy, you said that Whitebird is 3 stories?
This is an example of what we're aiming for. It has a 3rd story within a dormer.
Okay.
But its height limit isn't, it's not higher than the height limit.
And it's
Exceed the height limit.
Yeah,
It's kind of the,
That's
we went out to find kind of the example of something that I've spent a lot of time documenting your downtown and what the patterns are, the heights of buildings. And it's interesting to hear sometimes people talk about it like there's actually no housing there. There is, or there's actually no upper levels. There are. White Bird, I think, is a really good example of upper level housing in a dormer, exceed the height. But it's definitely, it's not a short building, but it works.
How many units are up there?
One,
Just one?
and then there's one on the second floor too.
Oh, okay, okay. Mickey, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so especially in the commercial area, you know, we're talking about give backs for owner occupancy. Are we really planning to limit this truly to owner occupancy or to owner occupancy / long-term rental? Because in a commercial area, I'm assuming that if someone was to put in a dormer, for instance, that would be a long-term rental. So when we do a give back, do we need to also include the opportunity for someone to agree that they will long-term rent or owner occupy?
That's number 3 in the on table 3 is the long-term rental.
Okay.
As part
Great.
of that. So
Okay,
that is
perfect.
included in there.
I can understand Anita's concern. I don't want to see buildings torn down and new buildings put up just to be able to take advantage of that. And I don't know how we avoid that. Because we want to keep that feeling.
I can see reducing maybe the landscape requirements, you know, but I guess I don't want to eliminate them. Because I feel that that's an important component to our downtown area.
Okay.
So I pulled up the map. There's 9 lots that we're talking about. And in this area between second and third, that 2 of them are full residential, or one's full residential already, as I'm assuming grandfathered in residential, and then the rest of them are all commercial. I think commercial entirely for all. So there's eight lots that would have some sort of modification that would potentially come about because of these changes.
Modification's one thing, but tearing down and starting over again is another.
Why would we object to if somebody wanted to tear something down and build it and make a very nice building that delivered a lot of units?
As long as it's not, as long as it fits the character of
Right.
downtown Canada.
And the problem we're gonna have is we have design review standards in commercial areas that aren't very adequate, and maybe we could focus on those to make sure we get something on Spruce that looks like Hemlock when we're done, right? That's the way to take care of it, but I don't think anybody on the focus group felt like it was a bad thing if somebody wanted to scrape a building and put up a new one.
As long as the design review components were stringent. I mean, I don't think they are enough now, and I think we really need to rework.
I agree with that, yeah.
For residential too.
Yeah, I think those interior courtyards are definitely part of the charm of Cannon Beach, and whatever we do, we wouldn't want to lose that
That's right.
kind of character.
There are
Some of them, yeah,
protect our design.
Lisa? Who else is talking? Who was talking?
Do I have to wear a dunce?
Gary was.
now?
Don't get.
Marcy, would you restate where this would apply geographically one more time, please?
To the zoned lots with street facing property line on North Spruce Street between Second and Third Avenues. So there's, from the front of property to the back property lots, street facing lots.
So this is Aaron's building?
That would be that block.
In the kite shop,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, because the other side of the street is zone park and then RM. So it wouldn't be in the same zoning.
The C1 zoned lots.
Yeah, so it'd just be the C1, which is the ones that are on the west side of Spruce.
We see this lot in places like Orenco Station, Joy, downtown Portland. And what we're looking at, I think, here is that we're trying to maintain the commercial aspect at the street level, but allow some flexibility for residential above that. We're not looking to exceed the 28 feet. The idea of the residential within dormer, we still have 2 floors and a roof. And that dormer fits within that roof. So we aren't really defining that as a third floor. It's just a residential unit within a roof.
Right.
So I think, that's sort of the clarification that we're trying to put here with this, allow occupancy on that level, whereby the use of giving a give back for the use of a dormer. And utilizing that street or residential units on the back, we're limiting those residential units to sort of a further point away from that street commercial zone, still maintaining the character of Cannon Beach, just expanding it in a way that we see in very few places.
And if it works, we might find another place to do it, but at least we're starting small and.
And it's a good place to do it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Matusik is on record saying he'll build it, so
Yeah.
why wouldn't he take advantage of that?
I had a question on this, about, I'm looking at the maps, and two of the lots go fully from Spruce all the way through to Hemlock.
Wow.
Is the,
I think,
I can't tell right now.
George's.
Are the lots actually go through? Because I think they may be the same property owner, but I don't know that they're the same.
Yeah.
The map might be inaccurate, but I just had that concern. If that is the case,
Then we would.
the street facing, making sure.
Around this.
Because yes, if we're talking Spruce, then they may, if that's the case, be like, oh, well, I can go all the way to Hemlock, start residential all the way to Hemlock and not fulfill that ground level commercial on street facing.
That's not the intent, so no, the language. I propose that as possible, and then you have a chance to review it.
Marcy, didn't you somewhere in here, I can't find where it was, talk about the, giving more, strength to some of the architectural design criteria?
Yes, thank you. I can't, so can we move on from this section? I've added, before we do. I've added that the intent is really to reduce but not eliminate landscaping in favor of some maybe more vertical options to focus on the commercial design review that would apply to these new buildings. So if we could move to that section. Scroll down. Things. So other amendments for discussion and what you're talking about, Lisa, I think is kind of, I begin to discuss it here. We do need clear and objective. We do need to adhere to the clear and objective language for housing, which applies even if it's mixed use. This applies to housing, even when it's about residential. So while this section here that I'm citing, and I propose that we make it much more robust than it currently is, we could also begin to address how it applies to your downtown. I think that the downtown design review should be ready for new developments. I'm hearing that it hasn't been the focus of this work yet, but I'm hearing you say that you'd like it to be looked at.
Yeah. You should read it before you.
I think even if we had, even a couple of examples of some design elements even, that might even be, beneficial just from the standpoint of giving an initial kind of, hey, here's what we're after for anyone who's coming in. Doesn't have to be exact, but I think it would be helpful, I think, from a staff perspective too, if there was just some kind of general design that we thought, yeah, that fits. And it would give anyone coming in an initial thought as to what the expectation is.
I was looking at Portland's, they have all those little downtown areas that are historical. And each one has a different 1 or 2 page design element. Design review checklist. And we could go through and pick out the ones that are relevant and add in the ones that we want. And it would be really simple to do, given the work that other people have already done.
Pictures. He's already shown us some of the ones that.
Yeah.
I think the chamber is a good example of, you know, how art was integrated into the design and part of the character, at least from my standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good
Theater,
point.
you know, I know.
I think that
helps the same review, and I think it helps us when we're initially talking to someone who might be coming in and thinking about it. So that we can set an expectation early on.
something that we've done for other cities that have really unique character is we give them clear and objective standards and a checklist, but we also provide a pattern book that's consists of mostly photos of what they already have. So staff can point to it and say, this standard, but see this picture like that. And I think that might be a good process for us to go through as a group. There are a lot of patterns that I've observed, a document, and we could add to those and I think pretty efficiently build those into a design review system.
At Sea Ranch, California, they have a wall. That's what you can stay in your house and like the color call out like Sherwin-Williams. It looks like an art installation. It's so cute.
Marcy, when Jan was talking about the idea of, you know, the concern about people taking down historic cottages to build, you know, in residential neighborhoods. I mean, if building is encouraged, is there can you bring in some, I know the national historic preservation rules and the state ones, but there are societies that protect them, but for a small town, I know there's some historical societies that protect certain houses or rocks or, you know, things like that. And I'm wondering if we could see what those look like.
I mean, like, actually state designated historic properties.
Historic, yeah, city designated historic.
Designation.
Uh-huh. Yeah. For certain cottages here in town that are really, you know, have been here for so many years, over 100, some of them. And just, you know,
Sure, I can bring you information about how small towns have done that. I also wonder if it's worth resurrecting the idea that one of the public benefits is preserving a cottage. So that was an early idea that I had. That it would be something that you would get, say, for providing owner occupancy. Something that it would be like in lieu, instead of providing owner occupancy, you might be able to have your parking waived by saving a cottage.
yeah.
That was the general idea.
I'd be interested in hearing those ideas or in discussing them. Definitely. I'd hate to see just the whole town turn into new development and all the cute old houses be ripped down.
Cottage tour is really a popular event and I think
Yes.
we should preserve that.
I agree. It's wonderful.
And what if somebody saved a cottage, but they were on a R2 lot and they built an additional dwelling? I mean, would that be something you could envision being a benefit? They saved the cottage, but they built an additional dwelling on their site and because they saved.
The gardens are part of the whole experience though. So if you change the footprint, you know, and have this different style house next to, I mean, I don't know. It just depends on the size of the lot and the design, but you can see it gets complicated where for me, it would just be simple to say you are a historic cottage designation and protect it and whatever give back the city might be able to figure out for that or.
Historic designation is typically something that owners have to opt into. And they get it, in some places, they get a tax exemption for doing that.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the level of?
Well,
That's
I'd like to know the different options, actually. You know, I don't know that much about what they are. But like the red house on Hemlock, is a historic cottage, but there is a little ADU next to it.
Yeah.
It's,
But it looks very similar.
it's cute.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a little barn or something, you know, and that's an ADU and that works. And next, you know, it works as an doesn't ruin the
Right,
cuteness of the cottage.
right.
Well, we're at the end of what I have in the packet. And so do you want to have more discussion about what's in the packet, or can I get a reading on is this material I should continue forward with for the adoption ready package that would go to the planning commission?
I think it's time.
Yeah, as long as you clear up that language about the give back or the, I mean, the addition of the FAR, how that works, you know.
What do you think about calling a house group, housing focus group to review the language once I have
I
it?
think that's a great idea.
Can I ask Steve a question?
Long as you're.
I'll be as kind as I can be. How many duplexes do we build a year?
Right now?
Any thoughts? I don't think.
been
have we
here-
done one? I don't know if we've done one this year.
I've been here just over 3 years and I don't think I've seen more than maybe one or two.
And right now you can build to 0.6 FAR.
Up to 5,000 square feet, from 3,000 to 5,000.
So what we're moving towards is incentivizing duplex building by reducing FAR to 0.35 or 0.5 if you take a deed restriction and require owner occupied. So I don't think that we're necessarily incentivizing duplexes.
Well, to your point, nobody's doing it right now, like, so making them smaller might help. I mean, nobody's built one now.
Hey, Michelle, if you're for it, then I'm for it.
Okay.
I'm not looking for a place to live.
Well, I think Mickey brought up the point that maybe the incentive is that it's going to be cheaper to build.
Right, and cheaper to rent.
And that's why there's the incentive, because it's going to be smaller, so therefore it'll be cheaper to build. And if it's cheaper to build, maybe there'll be more of them. That's, I
Okay.
mean, it's hypothetical, that's for sure.
He told us that it has worked in other jurisdictions and I'm,
And we have to do something.
yeah.
And Clay's idea of matching lease local is a great one. It's perfect for this.
And I found a place, it's 392 square feet.
Okay, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
I could say that I went on a tour of middle housing in Portland as part of the American Planning Association conference about a month ago. And the 30 block area in Northeast Portland that have taken advantage of the middle housing rule that they passed. Also, it relieves them of having to provide parking, not that all the developments did not have parking, some did, but it was up to the developer. But the thing that's really interesting about it is Portland is one of those places that ratcheted down the FAR. And they've just done an assessment of the types of units that have come onto the market as a result. And they are all smaller and they're all about $20,000 cheaper than the housing was before. So, I mean, they're seeing big benefit through this FAR reduction program. They're seeing smaller, more affordable units and a wider variety of housing types.
Still 20,000 isn't that much. But it's something.
Something, right?
They would also probably see a second order effect where larger existing homes would have a premium price.
They probably are seeing.
creating a scarcity value.
Unequivocally, Tim, yes. Yes, there's more demand for the existing larger homes and their prices have gone up.
But if people are interested in seeing the report that Portland published about the units that they're seeing as a result of that, can get it to.
Yeah,
the possibility.
that would be interesting.
Please.
Thank you.
I have nothing else then, about this topic tonight.
Okay.
Moving along.
That was a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
And Marcy, will you send out a notice to us to figure out a good date for the meeting?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Marcy.
anybody have anything good of the order? Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Night, everyone.